Well, I'm pleased to tell you that this morning I was woken up by a phone call from Governor O'Malley. And I've already spoken to him, and I know he's been working the phones with legislators today to talk about how do we get to a compromise, how do we come to an agreement, and how do we do it in a quick way that's best for the citizens of Maryland. So I think you'll see movement hopefully soon over the next few weeks. I think it's very important that we get this done before the middle of May at the latest, because all the local governments have to enact their budgets, all the school systems have to enact their budgets. They have to know what money they're going to have. So, for example, the school systems know how many teachers they need to recruit during the summer, because that's when it occurs. So the sooner we can get this done, the better. And I'm pleased that the governor's already out there trying to say, how do we get to a compromise? How do we get something where we can all agree and get it done as soon as possible?
Senator, one of the things I didn't hear you talk about was what the Senate president wanted, and that was gambling in Prince George's County. What did the governor say about that particular issue? Is that going to be off the table?
I think he's willing to talk about anything. I think he believes whatever we can get to get to a compromise, he's willing to talk about.
The governor's not been a fan of gambling. He's never been a fan of gambling. Let's just make sure the audience knows that. In fact, he was almost touting the same line that Speaker of the House, Mike Bush, was saying. We're being held up by this whole idea. They want gambling down in Prince George's County. Talk to our audience about how that played out, because a lot of folks said, there's the president of the Senate saying, do my deal, or you get no deal.
So that's a very interesting point and a very interesting question that I've tried to reflect upon over the last 3 days since the end of session. Because as Bruce kindly pointed out at the beginning of the hour, I'm on the Budget and Tax Committee. I was on the conference committee for the budget, the Reconciliation Act, the tax package, all these major bills that came together to form our overall fiscal policy for the next year. Never once did the Senate president say to me or say to any other member of that conference committee, you cannot make an agreement until they know what they're doing on gaming. We could have made an agreement, as you know, and I think you mentioned earlier, we could have made an agreement on the 80th day of the session, on the 83rd day of the session, on the 85th day of the session. It was the inability of the House of Delegates to provide a counterproposal or to move from their position on the tax plan that led it to not be resolved until the very last day. When we walked in on the very first day of that conference committee to talk about taxes, they said, this is our plan, which raised about $250 million, primarily on an income tax increase for people over $150,000. Our plan was broader and impacted more people, as you talked about earlier in the program, and raised about $500 million in revenues. I think anyone
Are you talking about the difference between where the tax kicks in, whether it's people making 100, couples 150,000, or going for, richer people, like 250,000? Is that what you're...
The House's rate plan started at 100 and 150,000. Our rate plan started at the lower rates. And I'll explain why in a second if I can come back to it. But to Charles's question, so they were at about $250 million. We were at $500 million. I think both of you who have watched negotiations in Annapolis over time, and probably anybody, any legislative body, you could ask probably the congressman, that somewhere, the compromise is somewhere in the middle. Right. Not an either or, but in the middle. So we walked in on the first day and their position was, this is where we are, we can't move. We said, all right, let's start talking. And we kept offering proposals and counter-proposals and counter-proposals. And one of your colleagues was there to see many of these meetings go on. And the House never moved and never moved. And from the first day to the last day, they kept saying, we can't move from this position. We can't move from this position. And in fact, it was finally when I believe the Senate president said, well, let's just get something done to get it done. If they won't move, let's agree to their position. And that we didn't do until like 6 o'clock on Monday.
And remind you, 7 o'clock is when they're supposed to print the budget.
Right, exactly. That's very late for us. So, and that led, whenever all of these things get pushed back to the end, there are more and more games that can happen. I think several commentators have written over the last few days, the the commodification of our vote, it grows in value as you get towards midnight, and
so
there
the
are
leverage
more and
of
more
each
issues
person.
in the leverage. And then what happened was, I think, an unfortunate display of transactional politics, where different delegations started to come in and say, well, this is what I need, this is what we need, this is what, and that's what happens when things get delayed to the end. But they didn't have to get delayed to the end, and no one was giving us pressure on the Senate side to keep it delayed to the end.